So initially, I had a friend send this video to me because they were curious about my input on it, and I was very apprehensive to it at first, and I didn't know why. Why was I not thrilled about this video existing? But I was like, okay, so there's a little bit of respect I need to give. One, since people usually don't like ask, they're not curious, they don't want to know about the experience. You do you, I'ma do me. Peace. Not try to understand it in the slightest. Which, you know, that's how most transphobia spawns, is people don't understand. And so they like, this is what I think it's gonna be, and I am going to assign reasons to it, and I'm just gonna believe that as fact without like asking people. It's like, hey, is this what you're really like or whatnot? So I was like, okay, well, this person's curious. It's probably more honest to like respond to it in earnest. I knew I was trans when I was 14. Only recently did I finally give myself permission to start changing anything. I'm going to cut this up, something a little bit more digestible, and there's going to be very little visual, so if you would like to listen to this while you do the dishes, play some video games, that's very much what this is going to be like. I will also not be responding to the entire That Dang Dad video. If you want to listen to that before or after I am done here, I ought to have the whole thing posted down below. There's only so much that can be encapsulated in like a comment or like articulated, and a lot of people don't really like think out their comments well. So I was like, okay, if I spend an hour or two to sit down, organize my thoughts, and then record them and then edit them down to a more digestible video, then that would be beneficial because I'd be answering That Dang Dad's questions. But the main reason why I was apprehensive at first was because a lot of the points he brings up in this video are stuff that like I've heard like Alex Jones or like Ben Shapiro reiterate. It's just like right-wing talking points that are just used to get a gotcha. So I didn't like these questions. I didn't like this video the first time around watching through it. But then if we go to That Dang Dad's YouTube channel, the dude is a former cop and talks a lot about left-wing stuff. Here, a rotten thing I did as a cop. We've seen for the past year, almost every single video is left-wing oriented. So I was like, okay, so he's not some right-wing person looking for like a gotcha bit to like own the libs. And if we go even further back, we can see how he was more right-leaning, and then we can see the transition to much more left-leaning. This person isn't coming from like a bad faith perspective. They're probably just curious. Before we begin, I think it's probably a really good idea for me to express like what I think about gender, like conceptually, and just like in context of the world we live in today. Society sees men and women and certain traits that defined those two boxes. The world is like, oh, if you're born with this or that, then we're going to by default shove you into those boxes, and we're just gonna berate you and bully you and generally make your life hell if you don't neatly fit into one of these boxes. So for example, I was very feminine growing up, so that led to some very negative childhood experiences, being abused, stuff like that. This is why queer children are like at higher risk of like abuse in households and stuff, is just because it's like, oh, we can't change who you are, so we're just going to manipulate and abuse you in different ways, try to force you into this box that like you actually don't fit very well into. So for me, this leads us into the pronoun debate. It's like, do the pronouns matter? I mean, on a technical level, I guess you could say they don't. I guess on a more like spiritual and metaphorical level, it's kind of like people have a preconceived notion about what a man is. And so if you're being called a man, people are putting those like notions and beliefs upon you, like expecting certain behaviors or like attributes as a result of this title. And if that doesn't line up with people's beliefs, then people will look at you weird. So that is where the pronouns come in. It's just like, okay, if I tell people I am this, they'll see me through that lens, and I fit through this lens, and then I'll just be a person to them. And there won't be any issues, and we can both go along our lives happily with an understanding of one another. But you know, there's so much society cares way more about what you were born with between your legs than literally any other trait about a person. at the end of the day, I think the majority of this is just like self-expression. Like, I'd like to express myself this way, and if I go by these pronouns, then people will hold me to a different set of expectations. So I think that's a pretty good opener. So now we can watch the video.
Welcome to That Dang Dad. My name is Phil, and tonight I have a weird question for trans people. Now, hold on, don't freak out. This is not me going mask off or being creepy, I promise. Also, if you're not trans, I think you should contemplate this question about yourself too. You'll see what I mean in a second. I'm certain I'm not the first person to have this question or think through this scenario, but on principle, I haven't actually researched anything as I write this sentence, as well as this next one. I will do so as soon as I pop this question, and then maybe all of us can take 5, do a quick Google search, and come back with our thoughts. You ready? Okay, here goes. If you are a trans person and you have transitioned in any way, socially, medically, maybe just internally for now, if you are in any particular way living as your authentic gender, what would that look like for you if you were trans?
I know this is like a weird thing to get on, but he says authentic gender. I see it, the gender part is a little bit controversial. I'd say as authentic self, because the gender is like, oh, what society sees you as. It's like, can I just be me? If you want to put this label on me, does that enable me to be my authentic self? Yes or no? And so that's why it matters. I don't know. When you say authentic gender, some people are non-binary or agender. They just don't prescribe to those like preconceived notions. They're just like, let me fully be myself without any labels. Like a big talking point in the Nimona movie. I know it's kind of like a small nitpick, but that's just something that I feel like it has nothing to do with like, oh, I want to be this gender. It's just like, this is just a word that helps me be me.
Uninhabited island in the middle of the ocean. Forget worrying about food and shelter, assume all your physical needs are comfortably met. My question is, what does gender actually mean if you are completely outside of a society, outside of a community, just totally alone?
All right, so what does gender mean outside of society? Because, different societies have different beliefs on gender. So gender is just a way to like force people to conform into a system to try to like make things cookie cutter from my perspective. So if we had a society without gender roles, then that would be good, because you could just be like, hi, I would like to be like the caretaker, I would like to be the teacher, I would like to make buildings, I would like to be a warrior, stuff like that. People could just do their things without people be like, oh, that's not very cis of you. The desert island analogy. Oh, but if you're not in a society, do your pronouns actually matter? It's like, no, and then things would probably be better that way. But we live in a society where they do, and so we need to figure out how to navigate that.
I was thinking about this topic because despite my best efforts, I am still occasionally exposed to the gormless ravings of TERFs and right-wing chuds. But I repeat myself. And I feel like the anti-trans movement has a very muddled, very unsophisticated view of gender, full of superstitions and half-remembered myths from childhood. I mean, these are the people who think anyone in the world cares about what some archaeologists in the future might think about our bones. Get real.
Funny part about that, so sexual dimorphism in animals usually don't extend that much to the skeletal structure. Like, yeah, like in different like species, like the females or the males are bigger than the others, but there's so much variance that usually people don't know just from looking at like rams. It's just like, oh, look at the horns, or like monkeys. It's like one of them has nuts hanging, the other ones do not. Like, for example, we have rabbits and we have chickens. You cannot tell until they're like fully matured what they are without literally doing like a blood test to look at their DNA, because their sexual dimorphism is not very like well defined. I know with chickens there's like, oh, the rooster, but you can't tell if a chicken is a rooster until is basically fully matured. So that's you're gonna be waiting a while to figure out what it is. A lot of the human sexual dimorphism is on the outside, so like the whole argument of like bones is just like really dumb. Like, going by skeletal structure is so unreliable that archaeologists have to use other factors, and they use like the graves to determine what people are. Like, a lot of the times it's very expensive to like drill into the bones of dead people to like extract the DNA to figure out like what sex they were. And even then, that's not like, what does it matter? It's cool, like, oh cool, we dug up a fossil, we can sell it to a museum, and then we can dig up more stuff, and we're looking for like cool bits of history that we didn't know about. or like looking for stuff to put in a museum so people can see the thing and then learn about the past history. So that kind of stuff is also completely unimportant. So it's just like a dumb gotcha that like isn't even founded in reality.
But their goofy thoughts on gender, for me anyway, still invite a kind of introspection. Not because they have anything of value to say, but rather, if I think they have the wrong thoughts about gender, then what are the right ones? And of course, we've probably all heard, oh, gender is a social construct before. That's a fairly standard, though possibly dated rebuttal to anti-trans material. At time of recording, I remain a Butler bro, so I'm also a big fan of their theory that gender is a performance, an active style of living your body in the world. But as I was thinking about that the other day, this weird idea started percolating in my mind. If gender is a social construct, then what happens if there is no society around to construct it? If gender is a performance, does that necessarily require an audience? How would a trans femme or trans masc person live out their femness or mascness in total isolation and totally outside of the systems and structures that exist all around us, such as...
So I don't completely vibe with what that thing dad is saying right here, because to me it's just like, oh, I act this way, I behave this way, this is how I like to dress or like present myself. This is just different like attributes of me, like mentally, physically, socially, whatever box they fit into. Sex aside, then it's just like, okay, then I would like to fit into that, so society will not see me as like non-gender conforming and then be shitty to me over it. So it's like, me personally, I don't know like a lot of people's opinions on this, but to me it's just like, okay, I fit more into this category of woman, so I would like to embrace that. I will have an easier time like socially and relationship wise. And to further elaborate on that point, like, you know, assigned male at birth, I was like, okay, and I realized I was at 14. I was like, this isn't good for me. I was like, okay, I can't do anything about it at this young age, so let me just very much lean into like mask presenting and figure out like all the boy things. Like I had to voice train my voice down so that way when I would talk with dudes, I would sound more like them, and they'd be less like, oh, why the fuck is like your voice so like squeaky, and like what is wrong with your throat? But as part of that, he did say performing gender, and I don't really like that, but that's just because like my experience performing manhood was just a very bad experience. I need to like go to the gym and get swole because your social status is higher as a man. The more muscle you have, the same goes with facial hair. The more facial hair, the higher status you are as a man. And weirdly, I was gifted in that aspect, so I had like this big bushy red beard for a long time. In fact, if you go look at older videos on my channel, same goes for like keeping my hair short. And this was just like a very drastic transformation between the ages of 14 to 15, where I was like, okay, I'm trans, but I can't do anything about it, so I need to super lean into masculinity. And then I did that. Yep. And it made me very miserable and made me want to die. And the past 2-3 months, I was like, okay, no, it's fine for me to be this way. I'm giving myself permission to be myself finally, and stop putting on this gender performance. And then suddenly, like, I literally can't sleep more than 9 hours a night because I'm not like chronically depressed anymore. And then like I'm also like not faking a deeper voice all the time when social settings, so that feels really good. Like I can listen to my voice back in this audio recording, for example, like the way you're listening to me right now. I don't die of cringe. I know a lot of people are like, oh, you sound like a guy or whatever. It's like, it actually doesn't matter to me, because like I would prefer to be happy with my voice than fit into one gender or the other. So if it's just like something that's like weirdly in between, I'm perfectly fine with that. If there was nobody around to enforce these like societal gender rules, then like I would just be myself. And I have to adhere to these norms and suffer through them because of society. And if society wasn't there, I wouldn't have to deal with that issue. So I see this as like a good thing. I think I might have lost the plot a little bit on the question that's being presented right here. But yeah, I've had to perform male for so long that it made me miserable. And now that I've just stopped worrying about performing, I'm so much happier.
On a deserted island, out in space, something like that. In fact, my weirdest version of this thought experiment is about the singularity, the hypothetical future event when all human consciousness will allegedly be uploaded to a cloud-based paradise. If you were a subjective entity with no body in an empty server, what would gender look like for you? And just to be clear, this isn't something that I think is a gotcha against trans people or the concept of...
I don't think I fully understand the question here, because if consciousness is basically just an AI that's interacting with other AI, would it be like Twitter, where it's you would literally just be your avatar? Well, in that case, things would be very similar to how you're seeing in this video. I have my avatar selected already. Okay, carrying on.
Transness. I believe that trans people are the gender that they say they are, full stop. That's why I found this thought experiment interesting. But anyway, give me 2 seconds to Google this and see what I see. Hopefully I'm not doing baby's first trans discourse. But if I am, this video will probably not be made, so if you're hearing this, I must have found something interesting. Anyway, uno momento. Okay, so... as expected, I am not the first person to think about Trans Island. Apparently, the desert island is the site of lots of trans discussion. What stood out to me...
yeah, like I mentioned towards the beginning of the video, is I'm used to this question being as a gotcha.
From a cursory initial foray, though, was that the desert island was being used slightly differently than how I'm using it. In various Reddit threads, it instead functioned as a kind of thought experiment like, if you were on a desert island with no social pressures or threats, would you still transition? Meaning, does your desire to transition feel like it comes from something deep inside you versus as a response to how other people see and treat you out in the world?
Because the transition is presentation, because it's oh, people saw me as this because I was putting on a front to appear of this gender, and then people see me transition from that gender to this other one. But if there was never any pressure to be the wrong gender in the first place, then transitioning wouldn't necessarily exist.
Some people use this as a thought experiment to find some kind of validation in their transition, feeling reassured that their transness was quote-unquote real because they would still transition even if no one was around to perceive them. Unfortunately, others seem to use this in a gatekeepy way, implying that if you wouldn't transition on a desert island, you weren't really trans.
Yeah, this is a stupid... if there was nobody to transition in front of, then it's dumb, because people would just be themselves. Transition comes from the perspective of other people. Other people see them as trans, but to me it's just okay, I'm going from not myself to I am now just myself, and my appearance may change, or it might look hyper-masculine or hyper-feminine depending on the day, but that's just a consequence of life, I guess. I mean, some people like good hair days, bad hair days type beat. It's people, I guess trans people more about that with their just appearance. What sex do I look more like at the moment? I've never compared this to a bad hair day before. My chromosomes having a bad hair day all the time. Oh my god.
Interestingly, in one blog post I read, and do not take my citation as endorsement of this person, please, the author expressed frustration with the desire to even try to talk about transness divorced from social pressures and expectations. They write, "It is a fact of our human condition that we cannot escape our embeddedness in the social world. There is nothing untouched in us by other persons. Nothing we have did not originate somewhere in another human life or lives. The idea then that upon arriving at Desert Island we drop everything we have ever known about human life is ludicrous." When we look at our body here or there, we look at our body with eyes shaped by years and years of having to look at our body in a social world under social circumstances. Our eyes and our visual apparatus are not just for seeing bare physical reality, they're for telling us what is useful and what is important. When we go to Desert Island, we know what a hammer is and what it is for, and unfortunately, we still know what breasts are and what they are for. There are no carpenters on Desert Island and no men, but what does that change? The hammer still holds the possibility of driving a nail. The breast still holds the possibility of damning us to inhumanity, so long as it is attached to the body.
I'm gonna be honest, this whole text flew over my head, but if I was on a desert island, I wouldn't. So, to give a quick example, in years prior, when I'm alone, I would just use my normal voice. And then, if I was around people, there's literally, I've trained the muscles in my neck to create, a different sound profile. So I would be hi. I'm so and so. And then I go into my room and I'm alone, and then I just sound like myself again. So if I was on the desert island, I would not have a need to have this voice because there is no society to perform a deeper, more like rumbling masculine tone in front of, because there is no social acceptance to be gained from doing that. So why would I even do that? I wouldn't. I would just sound like my normal self. Or like some people, they don't like the way their voice sounds as it is, so they would put in an effort to lower their voice or raise their voice. But in which case, that's just like not liking a thing about yourself. Even if people were alone on a desert island, they would still do that, and in like towards whatever like noise that they would prefer, and that would just be an expression of themselves, but without gender to like define it to on a desert island with no society, then it would be hard to put like a label on it, because it would just be like the noise that I prefer to sound like and how I would like to hear myself through my own ears. And if there were anybody, yeah, that's it.
While still not coming from the exact same angle that I am, that post does conjure up 2 important points. Number 1, don't waste too much time obsessing over an impossible hypothetical, which, fair enough. And 2, whatever gender is, performed, constructed, or otherwise, it is still firmly related to one's intimate, individual relationship to their own body at the end of the day.
Oh, and to elaborate upon that, like, society being around to be like, oh, you have breasts, therefore you're a woman. No, that doesn't like fucking matter, because even if you're by yourself, because like a lot of people have this experience where like they see themselves in the mirror, nobody's around, and they still feel dysphoric. So if you're fishing and you see your reflection in the water, you're gonna see your body the way it is, and it's still gonna feel like shit. So like that's also doesn't like matter, like to be like people don't want to transition just because there's nobody to witness them transitioning. It's like I have junk that I don't want. I would rather not use it. Like I would literally just rather not have it. And like having it is good for my partners, but if I didn't have it, that would make me happier. And if I have no partners, then I would want to not have it even more than I already do. The only issue with that is if I'm on a desert island, there's not like, what am I gonna do? Fucking castrate myself? That sounds like a recipe for death. So I probably wouldn't do that, but I would not embrace it. I would not be happy about it. I would just live with this. Thankfully, we live in a technologically advanced world that provides surgeries to fix stuff like that.
Now, cis people who stuck around, first of all, hey, thanks. Second of all, I'm not sure where your personal...
Also, that's not necessarily to say that's something like I have the hard line about, like I can't change my mind about in the future, because there's all like the girls with balls memes. But this is just something that's been on my mind for, literally the past 10 years. I have not liked having this extra, I think appendage is the wrong word, but not liked this extra thing on my body for the past 10 years. And I often dream about it not being there or removing it. So, body dysphoria at its finest. Yay, carry on.
At with gender, either your own or others. So very, very quickly, let's talk about social construction and gender performance. In the 1987 paper...
On a big part of that, a lot of people are like, oh, but what if you don't have like a thing to use for sex? So for a lot of people, the number one thing they look for in a partner is a sexual organ that makes them happy. And I'm like, I do not care about that, nor do I like them. So why would I want one? Yeah. I mean, there's ways to please people sexually that aren't require dick and vag. Okay? This also raises a really good question that I wanted to make a video about this. So for anybody who hasn't seen Mulligan, Netflix's new series, there's a robot who is just like a soldier whose brain was taken out of like his body, memory wiped, and then put into a robot. So it could be like a critical thinking war machine. And there was an episode that kind of like explored Todd's gender, where it was just like, if you don't have sexual organs, what are you? Does it really even matter? Anyways, that was like a weird small rant. Continuing on with the video.
Paper Doing Gender, Candace West and Don Zimmerman write the following. We argue that gender is not a set of traits, nor a variable, nor a role, but the product of social doings of some sort. What then is the social doing of gender? It is more than the continuous creation of the meaning of gender through human actions. We claim that gender itself is constituted through interaction. Doing gender means creating differences between girls and boys and women and men, differences that are not natural, essential, or biological, and once the differences have been constructed, they are used to reinforce the essentialness of gender.
Funny thing right there is I had friends say the purpose of a system is to keep itself alive. So a lot of animals have like an instinct of survival where it's like, I must maintain my health. I must procreate. I must make sure that we do not go extinct, except for like pandas and shit, but they're an outlier. So the product of any like social or economic system is it's alive in its own metaphorical way, in which it is designed in a way to continue its own existence. That is why you have like in capitalism is designed to create more capitalism. And socialism is designed to keep socialism in place. And communism is designed to keep communism in place and prevent that system of government from transitioning to any other system of governance. And this is like a similar thing where like the existence of gender rules it came into existence, but this ideology has a desire to stay in place. It's really weird to say like an idea is alive and it wants to procreate in the minds of up and coming individuals, but that is the best comparison I can make to how like we've all heard this, like you have like the alt-right brainworms, the left-wing brainworms. It's just like, oh, somebody was so their mind is so poisoned. Anyways, before that topic gets way too heated, people, they can all believe whatever they want. It's just a matter of like fucking with other people's lives and shoving things down their throat, to which the argument of like, oh, but all these like queer people are shoving genders like stuff down our throat. It's like, number one, no, we're just saying like allow people to be themselves. If they're like, hey, call me this, then just call them that. People have names, don't they? You call them by the name that they tell you. Hi, I am Jackie. You call me Jackie? You're not gonna be like, oh, what's up, Al? Okay, that's a dumb example, but hopefully you understand my point. Moving along.
If we do gender appropriately, we simultaneously sustain, reproduce, and render legitimate the institutional arrangements that are based on sex category. If we fail to do gender appropriately, we as individuals, not the institutional arrangements, may be called to account for our character, motives, and predispositions.
Oh, that is a big point. Yes. If we fail to do gender appropriately, like I said, like I had to lean super hard into masculinity just to like get by for the past decade. We as individuals are called into account. So before that, like I mentioned, like the mocked, bullied, harassed, abused, all that stuff. That's why like queer youth are at much more like risk of abuse. This is why people are like, this dude has long hair. I'm going to put gum in it. I'm going to yank it and pretend like the dude's just like schizo and nobody touched him. I'm going to cut it with my scissors during class. And society treats him as the villain for having long hair and not the people who are actually doing the shitty things. Society is like, okay, we'll do that then. It's like, oh, well, people were putting gum in your hair. Why don't you fucking cut your hair then? Huh? Did you ever think of that? Maybe the way they treated you is perfectly justified. And this is why people hate, like, the enforcement of gender norms.
Be called to account for our character, motives, and predispositions. So this is one take on the social construction model of gender. The idea that gender is a set of norms and expectations within a culture or a society that justifies some existing social order based on, in this case, primary sex characteristics such as genitals, the ability to impregnate, or the ability to get pregnant, and so on.
I guess a big part about the movement is we're not trying to eliminate gender norms. We're just trying to make it allowable for people to be not adhere to them. Like, you can adhere to them if you'd like to because you like that kind of stuff, or you can ignore them and be yourself without fear of society literally attacking you.
Gender is the repeated stylization of the body, a set of repeated acts within a highly rigid regulatory frame that congeal over time to produce the appearance of substance, of a natural sort of being. Gender ought not to be construed as a stable identity or locus of agency from which various acts follow. Rather, gender is an identity tenuously constituted in...
So they're reading Butler, Gender Trouble, 2002 edition. Page 43. Did this dude read whole ass books on gender to like page 179? Did he read whole ass books to put together this video? If he did, massive props like there, like a round of applause, please. I just want to draw attention to that this seems pretty well researched from like my perspective. And I appreciate that. Moving on.
Time, instituted in an exterior space through a stylized repetition of acts. The effect of gender is produced through the stylization of the body and hence must be understood as the mundane way in which bodily gestures, movements, and styles of various kinds constitute the illusion of an abiding gendered self.
So the part about this that like I find weird is a lot of people are like, oh, you are this gender, therefore you do things. In my experience, and I don't know how unique this is for me, this is like this particular like dress style, and I enjoy participating in like these gendered activities, and so therefore I identify as woman because society can make more sense of it doing that way. Like if I want to do somebody's makeup, if I want to braid somebody's hair, if I like who like go clothes shopping with friends and they're like, yo, how does this outfit look? And I can be like, yo, this would look great on you. As a woman, that makes perfect sense. I'm going to be myself, and being myself means I fit better into this category, therefore I go by this.
This would be what we mean by a performance theory of gender, as in, gender isn't something you are innately, it's something you do, something you mimic, something you maybe even parody. And of course, just in case it needs to be said, whatever your opinion about these models are, don't forget that just because something is a social construct or a performance doesn't mean it isn't real or doesn't have consequences for your life. Money is a social construct. A work week is a social construct. A government is a social construct. And all of those are very real, sometimes in painful ways. Likewise, a performance in this sense does not imply lying or inauthenticity. Instead, I think it's more like the idea of how, say, being a good friend is a performance. You can't just say you're someone's good friend. You have to live that out over repeated interactions and situations through acts of loyalty and kindness and generosity. I think a lot of religious people would similarly say something like being a devout Jew or a devout Muslim isn't something that you are, it's something that you live out in large ways and small.
Oh, this is the biggest fucking issue I have with religion, because like all those like pain in the ass people that like leave like shitty comments and stuff, they're not trying to live out being a good Christian. Like the easiest way to appear like a good X, Y, or Z is to give other people shit for not adhering to these beliefs. This is like the difference between like somebody who's like a vegan and like a Twitter vegan. It's like, I'm more concerned about performing veganism online before an audience versus here I am volunteering at an animal shelter to help people out. I guess I'll take a moment to go into that because I'm not vegan. I like eating animals. They taste good. Throughout this whole video, you might have heard my birds cooing in the background. I have 4 rescue birds. I take care of birds. I go to this bird rescue. I help the pigeons. I feed them. I clean out their cages. I refresh their food and water and help people with like the adoption stuff. That's just another example of like performative veganism versus like here I'm not a vegan, but like I'm actively fulfilling some of the stuff that like vegans ought to be doing. And I'm not saying that vegans don't do that. I'm just saying that like I'm living out the whole message of veganism to look after and care for animals more in society versus giving people shit because they enjoy meat. Yep, there we go. And continuing on.
Performance, but it's not insincere or dishonest. The classic example in linguistics would be something like, I bet you $20 I can do more push-ups than you. That sentence doesn't just communicate an idea, it creates a truth. By performing that statement, I have now created a new reality in which I will definitely owe you $20 because my long gibbon arms hate doing push-ups. Or, to continue the religious analogy, think of the sentence, I accept Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. This isn't just communicating an internal thought. According to Christianity, uttering that phrase sincerely produces a very real change in reality. That utterance is what makes you Christian. So, for me personally, at least at time of recording, when you ask me, what is a woman? My most succinct answer echoes Susan Stryker. A woman is someone who says they're a woman. A woman is a person who chooses to perform woman in the world, simple as. Okay, so back to the desert island, or even better, the singularity. Cis people following along, I now ask you, if you were all alone with no one to see you or evaluate you, what would gender mean to you? If you uploaded your consciousness to the GameFAQs forums and had nobody to look at, what gender would you be? And how would you know? I started Googling gender in the singularity to see what other people came up with.
I didn't fully grasp what he was saying, but like, continuing.
And I found some interesting stuff. First off, while it doesn't answer my broader question, in a 2014 paper about robots and cyborgs called Is the Post-Human a Post-Woman?, Francesca Ferrando writes the following. If gender has been historically constructed around the sexual difference, now that no biological nor sexual motives are connected to the genders of robots, gender finally proceeds in its raw hermeneutical vestiges. In other terms, even if sex will have no biological or physiological significance for robots, gender, its cultural apotheosis, will still be valuable for humans, at least in the near future, in order to relate more easily with our robotic significant others. In their series of experiments, Clifford Nass and Young Mi Moon have illustrated how people tend to relate to computers in the same way they would relate to other humans, including keeping the gender stereotypes and biases untouched when the robot is given a female or a male voice. To make humans at ease with robots, roboticists apply features which do not have any function other than reception.
Like I mentioned Mulligan earlier on Todd, the cyborg, that was the issue they explored through him in one of their episodes, and I thought it was a really good episode. Well, at least I really liked it.
If Ferrando is correct about cyborgs, it's likely that phenomenon may also show itself in our bodiless uploaded future, perhaps as a transitional phase for a generation, perhaps longer. In another
Okay, so what I wanted to go over with this is, if y'all remember Battle Angel Alita, so I'm pretty sure historically she is also another version of the Todd situation, where it's like she was a brain that was taken out of a human body and put into a cyborg body. So there is no sexual organs for people to look at and be like, oh, that is who you are as a person to define her by. And the mechanical suit can shape itself to literally be whatever shape she wants. And she chooses to shape it into a young woman. There was a villain in the show who stole her body and turned into like this giant like winged monster. Let me ask you, if you had her body that you could literally just be whatever you wanted, what would you be? Would you be a monkey? Would you just become a wolf? And then you would just go out into the nature and you would just like eat things. Is that what you would do? Would you identify as a wolf if you had the ability to be whatever you want? That's one area where it's like, I like this character because she's just herself. She has the opportunity to be herself unabashedly. And the issue with that arc, like I mentioned, her body was stolen by the villain. She had to pick up her old body and beat him as her old form, and it was a struggle for her. I mean physically, because her old form is not as powerful as the like cyberware body that she had, but like it's also just very metaphorical for, here's this person who has the power that you wish you had, and they choose it to be absolutely horrid, and then here you are trapped in this body not of your own choosing. It's just a very powerful metaphor in the manga that just, you know, it's one of those things where like growing up at the age of 14, you're like, oh, okay, this all makes sense now. Anyways, I just thought that was interesting to expand on.
Another paper, this one from 2017, authors Danaher and Bamford discuss the hypothetical scenario of uploading a human consciousness into a synthetic human. I found this passage pretty interesting in the context of this topic. The social construction of identity from a first-person perspective.
So, interesting thing about this is literally all of... So, what he's talking about right now is literally just the Sword Art Online Alicization thing. Because Alice and the dude, they're literally just AI. They're computer-generated AI, and they're like, this is who I am. This is, like, how I prefer to look. This is how I behave in society. And if we look at Alice as a character, she became, like, a really renowned sword fighter. That's not very feminine at all. They lived in a computer-generated reality with its own version of, like, social constructs and like what is expected of people, and they just didn't have such a hard-lined idea of like this is what a man and woman would be. So she was able to become more of herself despite, you know, not having any chromosomes to determine this is what you are assigned at birth. Well, I guess technically the robot like spat out like, oh, this is an AI configuration with that's femme. So like I guess you could also say like, okay, technically it was assigned female at birth, but it still has the same idea of it takes place in like the internet type. So I just thought that was a very interesting thing that Sword Art Online explored gender stuff as well.
Results from a combination of how our brains work and how cognition gets distributed between our brains and the environments in which we live. The perception that humans have that relate to their own body form a conceptual grouping which we label self. The human also interacts and communicates extensively with other humans and thereby forms concepts of those other humans. A person is the conceptualization of a particular human, whether self or other. Thus, we can think of a personal identity as a continually evolving set of information which is stored disjointedly across a set of different substrates, typically with the human body in question as the hub. In an extreme case of retrograde amnesia, all of the memories stored in the brain of the victim become inaccessible, yet the personal identity often remains linked to that human through the support of peers. If, however, the peers are not available, then the link between the human and their prior personal identity is broken, and a new personal identity must be forged.
Seems pretty scary that like if a trans person had amnesia, then the people around them would have the opportunity again to try to force them to be the way that they want them to be, as opposed to just like to let person rediscover themselves and make up their own mind. That just seemed like what that was hinting at. It's kind of a scary thought.
Gender only appears in that paper one time, and while it seems like the authors weren't prepared to go deep on that topic, I found that last little bit really interesting, because essentially what the authors are saying is that your experience of yourself is an evolving dance between your interior perceptions and how others perceive and treat you, and that the absence of others may alter your identity in certain ways. Along those lines, I want to read another citation here, and if Twitter is at all representative, a lot of you are going to hate this paper. I am not endorsing it, I am merely plucking a passage out to think about. Please go easy on me. Long story short, in Gender Without Gender Identity, author Elizabeth Barnes offers a critique of the notion that gender is solely and 100% determined by self-identification or self-directed performance. For her, this would exclude people born with significant cognitive disabilities which preclude them from having the reasoning or linguistic capabilities to self-identify as anything. She believes...
Well, in that case, it's just like, okay, this is what they were assigned at birth, and that's what we will call them up until, like, they have the cognitive function to be otherwise. I don't really, like, see an issue with this, or at the very least, I don't understand why this would be problematic.
Believes people in this edge case do not and cannot have an interior gender identity in the same way, and I recognize the thorniness of her comparison, that an infant lacks the reasoning capacity to have its own gender identity. Setting aside whether you agree with her train of thought, I did find this to be an interesting chunk of beef to toss into the stew that we have cooking here. She right.
This just seems like a stupid gotcha, so I think I'm gonna skip past this.
I guess here's where I'll stop quoting other people and I'll just tell you what I think. And just for context, I'm somebody who feels that male describes me perfectly fine, but who is not otherwise attached to masculinity as some stat that I need to min-max. I have a pink phone case. I feel comfortable lounging around in Uggs and leggings. None of that stuff makes me feel like less of a man, even knowing that some people in society think that it does. That said, I do choose to adhere to Western society's basic conventions regarding men. I have facial
I think that's important to stop here and acknowledge what he said about like the pink phone case and like Uggs and leggings is like for me, because I see that and that's very like feminine stuff, and that just seems like how I would like to be 24/7. So therefore, identifying as female and leaning a little bit more heavily into that, min-maxing the femininity, is just like, okay, then I think I would just enjoy life a lot more if I did this, because like as a guy, other guys will be shitty towards you, or like even women will be shitty towards you for not fitting into the gender norm boxes. And so that is like one of the biggest reasons behind like my coming out and transitioning, is just like, hey, I would just like to be able to embrace more of myself. And if by going by these pronouns helps me do that, then I do not have an issue with that. If I don't have any pronouns, then I am also fine with that. But to use he, him pronouns is just like, I don't fit in like masculine shit, being forced into it, and like people expecting me to like it just because of my pronouns. So if my pronouns are a representation of who I am as a person, what I should and shouldn't like, then I will take the latter and stop calling me by he, him.
So on a deserted island with no one around to perform for, if your internal sense of yourself is that you are a man or a woman, then great, you are that man or woman. But I think you'd be a different kind of man or woman in the absence of social expectations to react to. Not lesser, just different. Because you would be constructing your gender reality completely on your own terms, no negotiations or compromises or even dismissals. In a sense, you would be a man or a woman in its purest, most unprocessed form. Non-binary people following along, my intuition is that for you, this sounds like paradise and what you've been asking for all along, the right to live your body in the world in your 100% unique way, free of assumptions and expectations. I'd be curious how you all feel about this conversation for sure. I think this is something interesting to contemplate because of what the Destroyer Binder blog said, that there is nothing untouched in us by other persons. The Desert Island Thought Experiment, or the Singularity version as of right now, these are situations that are contrived and mostly impossible, but they do give us a little peek into a world with a different set of norms and arrangements. We don't and we can't live in that world, but we can use it to maybe know our real selves a little better anyway. Because this whole discussion has me thinking back to the unfortunately rare times that I look in the mirror and truly like what I see. The times that I, as a cis guy, feel something trans people would call gender euphoria. And for me personally, it's mostly appearance-based, and if I'm honest, the times I've felt the most manly have been when I see something in the mirror that I think other people will enjoy seeing. And it's this extremely bizarre paradox where I don't care about being seen as unmanly, but I take a lot of pleasure from someone else seeing me as manly. So as I get to the end of the script, I'm left with a weird question for myself. If I didn't crave the attraction and approval of others, how would I want to live this body in the world? What would I want to see in the mirror just for myself, purely as an expression of my unique internal reality? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't know how to think of myself as a being that isn't being perceived by others. And I don't even know if it's worth worrying about, because I will always be subject to that perception.
I think I'm in a very good situation with this because I work from home, so I don't have to go out every single day and worry about how others are perceiving me. I just perceive myself in my room as I'm sitting on my desk editing videos all day, every day. And I'm like, how do I feel about myself? How do I like how I sound? How do I like how I look in my own lens? Do I like my surroundings? How can I cater them in a way that I do? What kind of media do I like to consume afterward? Is that very like masculine or feminine? How do I feel about that? What does it say about me? How do I feel about those messagings? How would other people even perceive it? That stuff, the other people's perception doesn't matter because I'm not around people. I have had a lot of time to just absorb myself. I'm not like in a position where I need to worry about performing it for other people. I'm Like if I'm performing anything, like I'm performing for myself, which that sounds kind of weird. I'm pretty sure masturbation joke could be made there somewhere. So I'm not even have to worry about these thoughts in a way because I'm around myself 90% of the time and around everybody else only 10% of the time. So I'm just like, okay, how do I make myself the most comfortable during that 90%? And I figured out how to do that. And I only have to worry about the social stuff for like a fraction. And I know a lot of people who are trans do not have that privilege to just be themselves almost all the time. And not being able to just be yourself limits people's ability to explore themselves and their interests and disinterests. So the best I could say in response to that I don't know is just to spend more alone time, or to, like, everybody has like an idea of like a thing they like to do, not necessarily like oh, this is how I relax, this is what I do for fun, but just like create like a list of things that you really like and just like indulge in them repeatedly. Really evaluate like why you like these things. Like for example, I use Adora as my avatar, and I did this as well, where like I am on my 18th watch through of She-Ra, and I was able to more fully enjoy it, or at least enjoy it even more on my 18th watch through, because I had this newfound perspective that I could able to see myself through. Now that I could just be like, okay, I'm allowing myself to be myself. Let me just enjoy this through my newfound perspective of self. Think about your favorite medias, your favorite shows, your favorite music, and just listen to it through the lens of why do you like it? Not why is it good? Why would people as a whole like it? Why do you like it? That has to be the emphasis here. And how do you feel about that? Which this is not like a measure of your gender through the stuff you like. It's just like, be honest with yourself on why you like it, in the context of nobody will ever know why I like it, so why do I like it? What I'm getting at here is a lot of people will like something because other people like it. Or if they don't, they're like, okay, I need to come up with, if somebody asks me why do I like this particular thing, then they have to come up with a reason for liking it that they feel like is justifiable, or like a way that people understand. And that isn't always the actual reason why somebody likes a particular show or media. So that's something that I had to come to terms with, is just like, how do I like stop worrying about like this facade? So if somebody asks about a particular hobby or interest, would I tell them versus the real answer? And why do I tell them this fake answer? And why do I feel like this is the correct answer? And why am I not comfortable telling anybody the truth? It doesn't matter whether or not I tell them the real reason or not. It's just like a better way to understand yourself and who you are, because that just helps you learn more about yourself and a deeper appreciation for who you are as an individual. All right, moving on.
To quote one of the preeminent philosophers of the 21st century, you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you. My gender just is a collaborative project, a lattice of interactions and sensations distributed along a network of everybody I ever meet and the feelings those situations create in me. A hyperobject extending through space between me and my observers, and extending through time as relationships and interactions shape my self-awareness.
Yeah, but like, is that because it's you, or because people are telling you be this, behave this way, you need to like this, you need to dislike that? With all those factors, is your gender really you? And like, it's okay. It's like, a lot of people say like, yeah, I am this person, I like the way I am, but there's a lot of people who don't like the way they are because they were forced to be a thing by society, a society that doesn't like them. So like, why even try to be the thing that society forces you to be? Just be yourself, and you don't have to justify it to anybody, because fuck them, they don't care anyway. Which probably comes back to why earlier in this video he said this is a probably good question to ask yourself if you're cis. Because are you cis because society expects that from you and it prevents issues from occurring? Or like, are you actually happy that you were assigned what you were? Are you happy with the equipment that you were born with? Are you happy with how people treat you as a man and woman? Does it make you excited if you're all by yourself with nobody around? How do you feel about yourself? in isolation? How do you feel about yourself in a social setting? Do you feel good?
If I was alone on an island or uploaded into an empty server, that lattice simply trails off into a single thread I get to pull in whatever direction I want. I would be me, but a much different kind of me than I would be back in society. And what does that mean?
That just means society, through social and economic pressures, tries to force you into being what it wants you to be. So that way society can keep on existing in its own way, because for you to actually be yourself, independent of society, would affect society in a way that changes society. And because society is changing, that's going to make a lot of people who like society the way it is very mad. And then there's going to be a battle of the genders. Yes. What the fuck? That might be a really bad summary of it. But yeah, it's just like, are you you because you are you and you like being you? Or are you the person that society has forced you to become? And how happy are you with that? I was not happy. I wanted to kill myself every single morning I woke up. And I always had to tell myself, if things are going to get better in the future, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in the next year, but maybe 10 years, I will look back and I go, it will all be worth it. But now I don't have those issues anymore. So I'm like, okay, I'm no longer trying to be something I'm not. I'm no longer putting on a performance for people who would never accept me anyways. All I have to worry about is whether I like myself and am behaving in a way that I like and I'm proud of and I am content with. And I don't need to justify it to anybody else, because nobody else matters in my life as much as me. I need to look out for me, my own mental health, how I feel about myself, and just do me. And that is why transitioning is important.
For me, I think this thought experiment gives me a weird sense of peace, I guess. Because it means I'm not failing to live up to some gender abolitionist ideal if I wear a tie and a mustache to work, and particularly if I like the way I look in that tie and mustache. I'm stylizing my body in a way that makes me happy in a society that is reacting to that stylization. I've found a balance that works for me, which isn't to say that I'm not open to getting weird with my own gender, just that I can be happy when it isn't weird. And the reason that I'm passionate about defending the rights and dignity of binary and non-binary trans people, as well as agender people, gender fluid people, and people who have unlocked the secret New Game Plus gender, is because I think they all deserve that same happiness and balance and ability to experiment to find them. They deserve to love who they see in the mirror, and they deserve to feel connected to their bodies in the same way that I am connected to mine. Whether that means a performance applauded by society or whether it's a performance that baffles society. May 1,000 flowers bloom. Anyway, this was supposed to be a 3-page script and a 9-minute video, not sure what happened there. What's your reaction to all this? What would gender mean for you in pure isolation? Who would you be if you could be anything? Feel free to pontificate in the comments. As for me, just appreciate you being here and indulging me in a little philosophical reverie. I used to have AFK friends that I would drink and smoke cigars with and talk about this stuff, but now I'm an old dad and you are my friend group. Thanks for showing up.
Yo, the AFK friends to drink and smoke cigars with. That's always perceived as like very masculine, but that's something like I genuinely enjoy. Anyways, so now that I think I've answered all of his questions, but there's one really funny thing that I want to draw his attention to. I don't want to call it the elephant in the room because I'm not okay. I'm gonna be okay. It's gonna be a joke. It's gonna be a joke. I was going to make a joke about that dang dad's voice, but it does lead to a more serious question that I have, and that's because with his voice not being overtly masculine, was he mocked and bullied a lot like growing up, or would people just like assume he's gay? Or like did people like associate him with the queer movement by default because of how he sounds or like other behaviors and mannerisms? And so because he was shoved towards this box, now that like people are like forcing me like off to the side by default, now I have a more intimate experience with non-gender conforming people as somebody who just like by default doesn't fit neatly into my gender, and people are shitty towards me about it, and therefore he has a better understanding and is more mentally prepared to ask questions like these and is more open-minded because he has a little bit more experience societal rejection. I mean, it feels kind of bad to be like, yo, did society hate you for how your voice sounds? But as somebody who has been there, I'm curious if that was partially his experience, and like curious about the several ways that society has forced him to participate in gender roles. Or like, for example, I mentioned I grew out a beard. I fucking hate facial hair so much, but I grew out this fucking like itchy, thick mop on my face that I hated, so people would stop bringing my masculinity into question the moment that they heard how feminine I sound. And then, I also would drop my voice as well. Be like, yo, what's up, my fellow dudes? And so I had to really perform masculinity just to not be harassed endlessly. And like, I've still experienced like harassment in the workforce, whether it's just like homophobia or transphobia. If I had a question for that dang dad, I'm curious if how much or the exact ways in which people have been shitty towards him over not neatly conforming to masculinity. And if he's comfortable sharing those experiences on like an upcoming video, I've watched a couple of your videos now. I'd be very interested in seeing that, because even cishet people have to justify their cishet to people who are like insecure about their own cishetness. Anyways, thank you everybody for watching. Like this video if you like this video. Make sure to subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. I do have a video on asexuality coming up, I want to say next month. So subscribe for that, and hopefully you see it. And I'll see you later. Peace.